Hey guys, we wanted to just make a quick announcement, and instead of doing the quiz this week for your CEU, we are going to do code words. So throughout the episode, keep an ear out for 3 different code words and fill them into the link below.
Now let's dive into episode 3. Hey guys, welcome back to the Blossoming Together podcast. Today we're kind of going to be talking about new tips for new BCBAs.
Yes.
So Kirsten, do you kind of want to start talking about your practicum experience?
Yeah. I loved my practicum experience. I think we talked a little bit in the past. I really advocated for what I wanted from my practicum experience. It started off really hands-on. I wanted to acquire a lot of skills early on, so like assessments and stuff, and just get involved in parent meetings and just really big hands-on projects. But then COVID happened.
So how far along were you before COVID happened?
I was my first semester. So like my first semester was in person and then I did my practicum and then COVID hit.
Right.
So then I became a COVID student.
That's
and
fun.
it kind of sucked because I really did love hands-on learning.
Right.
And then my center shut down, but I was still collecting my hours. So I was really just working on program writing and report writing, which I felt already skilled in, and I wanted to get more.
You wanted more.
Yeah, I wanted more. I wanted to learn those little tricks and things that you needed as a BCBA, whereas I didn't want to just keep working on the same thing over and over again and be I'm really glad I got skilled in those things, but I needed more.
Not just churn out hours.
Yes.
Get some kind of experience out of it.
Yeah,
things you could use.
Yeah, the 1,500 hours. In theory, you're supposed to be getting all the knowledge that you need to become a BCBA, but I felt like I was just doing things to meet the hours rather than getting quality time from it.
Aww.
Yeah.
Well, so do you feel like at the end you were able to get that? Because you went back, right?
Yeah, I went back for the end of, I think it was the last 2 semesters of my practicum experience. So then I did go back, and I really, during that time, I had to cram everything I wanted to know in during that period.
How long did you have to cram?
I think it was 3 months before. So I finished my coursework before.
You finished your hours.
I did my hours at the same time finishing my coursework, but I had 3 months before I was taking, I set aside 3 months so that I could study for the exam. So I had 3 months to finish up everything.
That's hard though.
It was really hard.
Because you feel like you have almost a year usually to
Yeah.
get all your hours, and it's spread out. You start with kind of the easier stuff and you work your way up to the harder things. It seems like most of your time was spent doing kind of that level 1 practicum experience.
I did a lot of level 1 stuff, pretty much the entirety of my experience. And then I had to do level 2 and 3 stuff, which...
Well, you turned out good.
Thank you. I'm glad you see it.
So for me, I actually did, before I started my master's, I did the little A program at my school. So I collected fieldwork hours for that. So I did 1,000. And when I did that, I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
Neither did my supervisor. So
we were all learning together.
We were all learning. So essentially, I was just writing programs and keeping up with program books.
Yeah, exactly.
But, my center, we didn't have parent trainings that often, so I never sat in on one. Projects were very limited. It was mostly just staff training.
Yeah.
And then that was really all I got. And I got 1,000 hours of that. Oh, I forgot to mention, we're doing assessments. But one really weird thing about where I was, the BCBA never sat in on them. Maybe once when they trained you how to run a VB map. But after that, the students were allowed. So I used to run
Is that ethical?
I don't know if it's ethical. It's not ethical.
It's not. But
that's what we did, and I would write the programs, and they never gave me feedback.
Oh gosh.
And it's just in the air. I don't know.
So with the BCABA, I didn't go that route. I just went straight for the BCBA.
Yeah.
How many hours did you do so you did the 1,000 hours for BCABA. When you went to do hours for BCBA, how many more hours did you have to acquire?
So I never took the BCABA exam. Okay. So I just essentially started over when I did the BCBA. And my school also lost its accreditation. That's why I never sat for the BCABA exam. It was a lot of work. You had to sit and send in all your syllabi. It was a whole process. One of my friends did it. But it took her almost a year to sit for the exam.
That really stinks.
That stunk. And I was like, that's not what I want to do. I didn't have this big, well-rounded experience where I felt like I could have even been good at my job. So then I came to where I work now.
Sure.
And as I said, one of the first practicum students there as well. So they came up with the candidate role when I start, kind of a few months after I started. And I felt like even though it was new, I got a pretty good experience. And the last time I mentioned, parent trainings I didn't get to sit on, but I helped with staff training. I got to do mock supervision.
Yeah.
I had a lot of support from my supervisors that tried to teach me as much as they knew.
It was a big difference and like a big jump.
So I felt like I was a little more prepared when I went into the BCBA role.
Can you tell us a little bit about, so I didn't do my Practicum experience where we are now. What does that candidate role look like?
The candidate role when I was a student looked like you had 15 hours of time to do indirect work.
Sure.
So within the indirect work, we were training staff, we were writing program. Essentially, the BCBA kind of picked what you were working on at that point. This was before we had the checklist.
Okay.
So it kind of would be like, my supervisor would be like, okay, my clients need XYZ. Can you do this? And it was never something where they would give you a task you couldn't do. They helped build on it.
Yeah,
it started with the easier stuff. It started with program writing, helping with assessments, and it led into more detailed things like writing behavior plans, writing discharge reports. Essentially, I had 15 hours every week to work on stuff.
At this point, did you guys, were you able, once you get to that, third level, were you becoming center support, which is where you have that mock BCBA role?
When the role started, we had center support.
Oh, cool.
And that's when we were trialing it out. So if
it's new.
If you aren't familiar with our center support is staff that kind of helps out on the floor when your BCBA may not be available to help out with behaviors, help out with any programs a client or a technician may be having trouble running. So we started off on that role.
Yeah.
There was a learning curve.
I'm sure.
No one at first knew what center support was for. We were getting called for bathroom breaks. And then
you're like, wait.
No, this isn't what, and the supervisors did a good job of saying guys, this isn't what it's for.
Yeah.
And kind of coming up with a new plan to disseminate that information. Nope, these people are to help with behaviors. So within the center support role, we would also have weekly meetings.
Yeah.
And talk about all the behavior plans that, the BCBAs created, things we could do differently. And we were also part of, in that process, we kind of gave feedback to the BCBAs as well.
Yeah, with what you're seeing on the floor.
You never get that experience, I feel like, anywhere else.
I was going to say, so I didn't have that experience. I really respect that, those, you guys as students are given the opportunity to essentially be mock, pretend supervisors, your little mini supervisors.
It's really great. And even before the center support role, I had opportunities to do mock supervision without my BCBA. We had a little data sheet that I would go in and fill out.
Yeah.
Did the technician do this? Did the client do this? And then I would sit and report it back to my supervisor. This is what I saw.
Yeah.
And they were still responsible for delivering some of that feedback. But over time, as I got a little more confident, they let me do it.
That's really good practice.
That's really great.
Oh, I like that.
All right. So going into, tips and tricks. One of the hardest things I feel like, and one of the most important things, are to build really good rapport with your technicians and have a good communication system.
Yes.
Right?
So I think that is probably one of my number one tips when you do become a new BCBA is a lot of us kind of graduate from that student role into a BCBA role at a lot of the places that we were working before. So you're going from being peers and friendly with these technicians to now you are overseeing them.
Right.
So working on that boundary of how to provide effective feedback and ensure that they are getting quality supervision while also maintaining professional boundaries when you were once their peer and had a different relationship with them.
I worked where I did my practicum experience. There was that fine line of where I felt like before the techs could feel not gossip.
Yeah.
But, they made those comments in front of me. Right?
Yeah.
Friendly. Well, you know how it is.
Yeah.
And I would kind of have to be no,
you have to set that boundary and the expectation
and it was really
now.
awkward.
Sometimes it is, right?
Maybe before I would sit and be that
did happen.
That happened. Oh, so gross. Whereas now it's no, let's keep it professional.
Yeah.
So, at first maybe I didn't know what to do. So I'd pretend like I didn't hear them.
You know what? That's a good method. It worked for you. It worked in the moment. Kind of. So with your technician relationships and those boundaries, how in supervision what strategies were you using in the moment to after you kind of figured out how to do things to set that boundary?
I feel like I just was really direct.
Okay.
I went in, with the purpose. I'm here to supervise you. If the conversation started to get too personal or too gossipy, I would just bring it back to the client. Like, oh, so can you tell me about how this and this went? Or can you show me this and this?
Yeah.
So that we had something to focus on and we didn't have the chance to, divulge into anything else.
Right.
Mm-hmm. One thing that was really awkward for me before was after I passed and I took on the role, I was like, do I unfollow everyone?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And so I did.
Did you?
But then I felt like even weirder about it.
Because then they're like, wait, now does she not like me anymore? No. Like, what's going on?
So then I don't know, I felt like I was still a little unsure of myself. So I would sit and be like, oh, well, I had to.
Yeah. With your center support role, kind of guiding into that, we kind of talked a little bit about providing feedback. That's really a necessary component as being a BCBA is how do we provide feedback? Did you get the practice during that center support role to provide it kindly, but also holding that boundary?
Definitely. I believe that role really helped shape the way I could deliver feedback. That's scary.
Yeah.
You don't know how to. So I was always in that position, after I helped with a situation, I had to give the feedback, this is what we could have done. Or I noticed XYZ, but it was different in the sense where I could be like, well, we'll check in with your BCBA too. You
had a fallback.
Yeah, I had a fallback where as the BCBA, you're like, I
have to make these decisions. Ooh, what a weird.
But I feel like I didn't have to say anything along those lines when I transitioned into that role, really.
Yeah.
What about you? You came in, you worked as a BCBA at your old center for only a little short amount of
yes.
time, right?
So it was my experience was a little bit unique in that sense. So I finished my practicum experience. The place that I was didn't have a BCBA role. So I ended up transferring to another center to become a BCBA, after I had passed my exam. But I was only there for a few months and I just didn't, I didn't have that experience. I provided feedback, but I didn't have, I didn't come from being their peer. So it was really nice. I had a fresh start.
Right.
But there, I really, I decided on some methods that I wanted. I thought about it as when I was a student or when I was a technician, what was important to me.
That's
because, the technicians are the backbone to our field. They are doing all the heavy lifting for us where we're helping them, guide them.
We're only there for a short hour, 2 hours at most.
Exactly. Yeah. So the number one thing that I did when I started as a BCBA is I really wanted to ensure that I was providing feedback in the way that my technicians wanted it. Right. So I established a survey method. So I created a survey that I would send to each of my technicians asking them and it had just and I didn't want to make it too long because if it's too long, no one's going to complete it. So I just created a 4-question survey, asking them how they received feedback best. Did they want it in the moment when things were happening or did they want me to wait till the end of the session? I also asked do they want more constructive criticism or do they need that positive feedback to feel they're performing their job correctly?
They're really good questions to ask because I feel sometimes when we're asking these questions, the most common is how do you want it delivered, right?
Yeah.
Do you want it written or do you want it verbally? But we forget to ask what really works for them. Do they want it delivered a little nicer? Or are they fine with that constructive criticism? So that's really good.
Yeah.
So another thing I feel that is really hard when you're a new BCB is figuring out in supervision and with your indirect time, making sure the data is being collected appropriately, correctly, accurately.
Yeah, it's so hard.
So how do you feel you tackled that?
I feel so coming from a student, I think this was one of the things that I really struggled with initially.
Well, you there were no sessions being run.
Yeah.
So you weren't really looking at the data, right?
Yeah, I wasn't really seeing that. And then two, I really learned the importance of data. And that's kind of where my brain went. I was like, oh my God, we need all these creative methods for collecting data. But I didn't really make it easy for the technicians. Yeah. I was like, okay, we're going to collect, I did time sampling.
Oh, that's hard.
It's so hard, but I was this is what I was told is going to be effective. So then I would look and at my data and be whoa, this program wasn't ran 4 times this week out of the 5-day week. What is going on? So I talked to the technician and they're like, it's really tricky. One, they use an EMR system. So they used a tablet to collect data, but I needed them to collect paper data on the side for this. And they're like, I don't have the time to carry this.
Depending on your client, do you have time to carry?
Can they? Do they need to hold their child's hand while walking through the hallway and things like that? So I really, after a few months of being a BCBA, I learned like I really need to modify the data collection method and talk with my technicians about what's going to be feasible for them. Like, how can I still get creative with the data collection because it's the most important part of our job, but make it so that these technicians can easily collect it.
Right. When you first started out, did your center or the place you worked have a universal data collection method for how they were collecting data?
The first place that I was a BCBA, we did program books. Okay. So we just had all paper data, which I kind of love.
So you were sitting and like looking through the paper data?
Yes. Okay. And it was a DTT center. So they were like sitting at the table doing like mass trials. Right. So I like would have to like flip through each program and look like through each of those, which I love paper data. I love paper data, but I
feel like paper data makes you a strong tech though.
It makes you a strong tech because you can't, it's a lot harder to falsify.
And you're looking at all the data from what you did all that day.
Yeah.
Versus at right now in the electronic system, you're just putting it in. You're not sit and look at your graph.
It doesn't. Yeah, you don't get to see it as easily.
And it might not click. Oh, this is what I'm working on. You're just reading it.
Right. So yeah, I really wanted to modify. That was like that's something that I recommend to new BCBAs is ensure that you are like making sure that the data is easy for your technicians. Ask them how they want to collect it. Or if you see a program's not being ran correctly, it might not be because they don't know how to run the program. They might not know how or be able to collect the data.
Oh, I love it. And then also going along that, you work on how to deliver feedback or what they like. Then you work on the data collection. Are they collecting data? Mm-hmm. What's your next step? What else is something that you're thinking about?
With our technicians, I really like, it kind of goes back, we briefly touched on it, but just like ensuring the boundaries with them are clear. So I was lucky enough to like come in strong, like as a supervisor. I wasn't peers with a lot of my technicians, so that was kind of easier for me. But I didn't want to be cold, and I wanted to be friendly with them. So I ensure like we always tell the technicians, let's pair with your client.
Got to pair with your tech.
It's my job to pair with the technician. And we never want to take away from the effectiveness of the child's session. But when there is downtime, if the client is engaging in their own reinforcement time where they don't need the technician, use that time to get to know.
Ask them how their day is going. Yes. What they did over the weekend.
Like get to know what values they have, because the more you know about your technicians and what values they hold, you're going to be able to apply feedback and make sure that their like client session is effective, because you can use their values to guide that, if that makes sense.
Also, if they're having a rough day, do they feel comfortable coming to you and just saying, this is happening in my life. Yeah. Maybe in supervision, you take the lead. Yeah. Today. Sometimes I feel like a tech needs someone they know they can trust and go to and kind of
have that support.
Even after a long day, you need someone to go vent to. And if you go to your BCBA, like, who else is going to understand what you're going through?
Exactly. And we talked about they're the backbone of the field. Do you remember how hard those days were?
They're very difficult. You're working 8 hours a day.
Sometimes 12. Sometimes it depends.
Some places don't even have break. We're lucky where I was. We got our 30-minute break. Got a break when they went into services. But some places you're just running session for 8 to 12 hours, maybe driving. And then if you have back-to-back hard days.
Right. And then you feel like you're not supported. Like I remember as I was a practicum student at this point, and I was like well respected and I felt really supported. But I was having I had 2 really challenging kiddos, because it's always the students who have the most difficult cases, because they're trying to give you the experience as BCBAs. But I had really, really challenging 3 days in a row where I was aggressive kiddos were beating up on me, and I was just having a hard time. And my supervisor, she didn't mean to, I don't think, I hope, but she unintentionally just provided me feedback really directly and really kind of harsh. There was no sandwiching. There was no positive interaction. Yeah. And I just remember asking for a bathroom break and going in the bathroom and just crying. So I was like, oh my God, my clients hate me. And now my BCBA thinks I'm doing everything wrong. So it's ensuring that the way we provide the feedback is going to make them feel supported.
Very important. Because even without, maybe that, little icing where she delivered that feedback in a way that you didn't want it in that moment, there's so many days as a technician, you take those breaks and I feel like I used to cry all the time. Well, I didn't cry all the time, but there was times I would need to go take a break and just wash my face.
Or take a deep breath.
Yeah. And so that if I didn't have a supervisor that was compassionate and caring, that knew my style, it might have been the thing that broke me. Maybe I would have left the field. You never know.
100%. It's like so necessary. So we really need to just kind of recapping on that. Keep in mind your technicians are doing the hard work. What is like valuable to them? How are you providing feedback and how are you going to make it meaningful to their client session?
That's great. So transitioning away from kind of, one of the hardest things is figuring out how to handle your technicians, how to help best support them. Another really hard thing I feel like as a BCBA is learning how to set those boundaries within your work life, your personal life, and then with parents.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So do you want to kind of start talking about that a little bit? What do you feel like was the hardest for you?
Yeah. So when I came to where we work now, I had never worked at a center where I was able to have like open lines of communication with parents, like via texting.
Right.
And I really wanted to be
You wanted them to like you.
I wanted them to like me. I wanted to be personable.
I want them to like me.
Because we talked briefly when we were talking about parent training a little bit, like they have such hard days. Like it's my job to ensure that
I can make it a little bit better.
I can make it brighter. Yeah. So I really wanted to be readily available for my parents. So I would text them updates. If parents like signed a release form, they asked for pictures throughout the day.
And you know what the hard thing with this is? Once you set that standard of I'm going to send you this and I'm going to send you this, it becomes like, oh, well, today you didn't.
It breaks a little bit.
Yeah.
So yeah. And when I started out, each of my families, I would like text them brief updates and I would tell them about like the client's day. But they would even text me like asking about like challenges too. Like, hey, so-and-so is doing this, like at the center, I know you're doing that. How can I work on it? So parents were asking me this and it would be like past my working hours. I'd be home for the night and my like husband and I are having like dinner or something. And I'm like on my phone, like responding to a parent.
And then your husband's like, what are you doing? Because they don't have jobs. Both of our husbands have jobs where, they clock out.
They have clear boundaries.
Yeah, they have clear boundaries. They're like, that's a tomorrow
work?
issue.
Yeah.
Or they're logging out. I'm like, well, we'll deal with it later.
Yeah.
Versus it's hard to explain to the other partner, well, my job is also someone's life.
Yes. And I think working in the mental health field, like we just want to help. We always want to be helping. So like we're doing that all day. And even if we're not on the clock or even if I'm not texting a family, I'm always thinking about my job.
Right.
I'm like, oh my gosh.
This isn't a job where you just disconnect.
You can't turn it off.
No matter if someone's like, oh, leave it at the door. This isn't that kind of job where you're going to leave anything at the door. It might be a Myers or Target. That reminds me of, my
so-and-so.
client. Like, I think he'd love that.
Yeah.
It's the small things.
It's always on your mind.
Yeah.
So setting up those boundaries early on is so important. So going back like with the family thing. So I had this family and I would text them often. And their child had a lot of really extreme behaviors and the parent would text me like at first it started like during dinner hours and then it was like at 9:00 at night they'd be like, oh, so-and-so is going to be out tomorrow. And I was like, okay. So I'd respond 9:00 p.m. and like, no problem. Have a good night. And then it got to the point where I was receiving text messages at like 11 and 12. And I didn't I had my phone on because I'm sitting on TikTok or doing my me time. So even during my me time, I was getting like inundated with this work content.
And do you feel like continue that trend for a while until you set the boundary, or did it just reset once the client left?
That was my breaking point. So I was like, oh my gosh. And I met with my lead and I was like, I don't know what I did. Like, I just wanted to be readily available. And now I'm too available. So I just had to be honest. Like in the next parent meeting, I had to set that. And I said, I am here for you, but I set clear working texting hours. So I explained to the family, I am available between these hours and these hours. And it just really helped me know when I was going to be able to respond to them. And even if they did text me, now I don't feel the guilt of not responding, if that makes sense.
That does. One thing I'll tell parents is, if something happens, feel free to text me, but I've always told them I'm not going to reply until, the next day when I'm in.
Yeah,
Unless usually if they're sick. Then I feel like that's always, I'm like, okay, I hope he feels better.
Yeah, because it's easy. That's not you're not problem solving in that moment.
I don't have to think.
I want to take a quick pause and just note for those receiving CEUs, our first CEU code word is going to be ice cream. Ooh. So keep that in mind when you take your quiz. Code word number 1, ice cream.
Capitals?
Just ice cream. Either way.
Okay, sounds good.
Should work.
Awesome. So we've talked about the boundaries with parents. What about with your work? Like I said, It's always on your mind.
Yeah.
One thing for me was because I wanted to be so in tune with my technicians, I didn't take the time in supervision or at work really to work on my indirect tasks.
Yeah.
So I was taking it home every day. And I was like, let me write my programs. Let me create materials. Let me do X, Y, Z. And it was becoming, I would be working until like 9 p.m. And, anyone that knows me, that's my bedtime too.
You know why it's hard is we came from being students where we needed to work all hours of the day to get those 1,500 hours
Because I would
met.
go home and I was like, I need more hours. I need to finish.
I need to get my stuff done. So you had this way of working like when you weren't at work all day, every day. So then when you get into this role,
you continue.
Like, that's what you're used to doing.
Yeah.
When I switched from like my first BCBA job to coming here, that's when I like set my like boundaries for myself. Like I really tried to I try my best to not work on things at home. So what
it's
I like,
inevitable.
It's inevitable. Yeah. I feel like, but it's so important to try and like establish whatever works for you. Some people really enjoy working at home and doing that. And like, if that works for you.
With no distractions. That's me. I need that time where, I'm a chatty person. If I'm in the office working, I'm going to talk to you.
Yeah. We're going to catch up.
Kirsten, how's it going?
Yeah. How's the baby? Yeah. Like, let's talk about this.
And then I get distracted. So for me, I just started setting one weekend morning.
Yeah.
My husband's asleep. No one's awake at that time. Everyone sleeps in. And I just worked on my stuff then. And that worked really well for me as I was getting into the groove of things. Because in the beginning, it also took me a while to sit and, I wasn't as good as maybe writing programs.
You're not as quick.
Yeah, I'm not as quick. It took me like maybe a little bit longer than it should have. So it gave me that wiggle room where I didn't feel guilty doing it at work, or I didn't take it home on the weekdays. I could just disconnect.
Right. That's so similar to you. You do the mornings.
Yeah.
I did so I am notorious. Like everyone in the office knows I am terrible at doing my notes on time. I'm like, and I try so hard. I tried like giving myself reinforcement strategies. I don't know what.
Not enough.
I couldn't do it. So I set like a working time for myself on Friday nights. I used to like end my day at 4:00. I would go home, be home by 6, and then I would work on my notes from like 6 to 9. And that was just like my indirect time. I worked on notes. I had my like glass of wine and ate my little chocolate chip cookie for the day. And that was like my little, and it worked. But otherwise throughout the week, I really tried not to like work during the weekdays.
And I think one thing that's also hard is when you are doing this extra work, you feel guilty about it. Yeah. You're like, everyone else leaves their work
behind.
Everyone leaves their work behind. And here I am. I'm stuck doing my notes because, we have Emily in our office. She does her notes right there and then. But she did it. Why can't I do it? So I think also taking away like that comparison.
You can't compare yourself. You need to know what works for you and what those boundaries look like. So before or like once you become, you're a new BCBA now, like set aside time to really think, be like, do I need these boundaries? When do I want to be working? Do you have a family at home? What is my family time going to look like? As long as your job, I would recommend, don't let your job take away from your values and your family time. Like our job is, our job is so important. What we do, the kids mean the most to us and we love what we do.
And that's why we do what we do. We want to make a difference.
Yes.
That's why it becomes this loop where we're stuck in for so long.
You're stuck.
And then you get burnt out. So when you are doing that, like prioritize your clients, but set aside time that you are working and then like set your clear boundary of this is my end time. Like what I have done is like have a very firm end time of my day. This is my family time I'm going to work with. Like I'm going to hang out with my child or my husband and spend some time, like quality time. You don't want your work to take away from that. And one other thing I think is very important is, you're going to get into a groove maybe you don't like as a new BCBA. It's okay to reevaluate what you've done. Like you did. You went back to the family. You're like, guys, this isn't working for me anymore. Let's do XYZ. That's okay. Just because you set that standard in the beginning doesn't mean you need to continue it if it's not working for you.
It's okay to change your plan.
It's okay to change. We change our plans with our kiddos. If they're not working, same things with our boundaries. We can change them up, make it work for you, make it work for your family, and you'll be fine.
Yes. So we touched a little bit on like work-life balance and boundaries. So figure out what's going to work for you in that. I want to talk a little bit about like organizational stuff. So when you become a BCBA, there are so many things you need to keep in your brain. Like you have to come up with systems. We have our CEUs that we need to track. We have our supervision hours that we need to track. Like when your assessments are due and reauth like periods and things like that. Like there are these things that as humans, we can't just like know off the top of our head. So it's really important to kind of create your systems early on. Like do it as soon as you like. When you first become a BCBA, typically the onboarding is going to be a little bit slow. So during that time when you have a lot of free time, create your system. So what I did was I created some like Excel documents to track like, so with our job, we have billable requirements. So I would like create an Excel document, like noting my billable requirements for each of my clients, how many hours that I needed. And like, I would just track those throughout the week. And on that same document, I had like when that client's reauth period is up. So they reauthorize every 6 months. I had that date and it turns red 6 weeks beforehand.
Wow.
So like you, I know we have different systems. You and I are just like different organizational people.
Right. That's totally fine. Whatever works.
Exactly.
For
like it works for me.
And I remember coming into the role, you were a BCBA when I started and so were a few other people. And you guys all shared your trackers with me, your organization
oh my gosh,
system.
did you?
And I would sit and look, I'm like, this is so much work. I can't.
Yeah.
It would overwhelm me. And I would try. I'd stick to it for like a day or two.
Yeah.
And then I just couldn't keep up.
It's like, it's so hard.
So for me, just picking those key things I needed to keep track of, just writing them down and sticking them on my desk was enough.
Is that what you,
yeah.
So you
I just
like
needed
stickies?
that prompt of like it's due on this day. So I have stickies everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's all I need. If it's on an Excel sheet, I'm not going to go look at it. I just need it readily available.
Yeah. That I don't know. I feel like I couldn't. So yeah, that would not work for me.
Find what works for you. Don't go in and look at someone else's system. Be like, I need to be that person.
And we all like went through a grad program. You had to be organized to get through that. So like what was working for you then? How can you apply some of that to organize you?
So for me, I think I'm a brain dump.
Yeah.
Both my supervisors had me write our agendas for the week. And in those agendas, I would just brain dump everything that needed to be done.
Sure.
So, okay, I have this thing due for, my supervisor. I would write it down. And at the end of the week, that's just what I would look at.
Right.
And be like, okay, well, I did that. And I checked it off. And I felt good about it.
And so that was effective for you. I'm really glad.
And at school, we're lucky because they have canvases or whatever. I don't know what they call it. But what is it now? On there.
Yeah, it's like a little
I didn't have to
system.
go through I was never the person to go sit through my syllabi and like, I know you are.
I'm highlighting everything.
The highlight of the due dates. But that was never me. I just be like, oh, let's do this day. Like I see it.
Yeah.
I'll figure it out then.
One other thing with like organization that as becoming a BCBA, I was like really stressed out about was CEUs.
Oh, yeah. And that for me, I was like, I have to get
32. So just as a reminder for everybody listening, you need 32 CEUs, 4 of which, let me double check, 4 are ethics and 3 supervision. So you need that every 2 years, just as like a general reminder.
How are you keeping track of this?
Me and my Excel documents. So do what works for you. Yeah. So one thing, please don't make the mistake that I made and wait until 3 months before your reauth.
Yeah, I didn't do that. My auth's coming up and I did them all already. I just have to submit everything.
See, that's impressive. I waited. So I like did CEUs, but the other thing is like, if I don't use like my organization type A brain, I am really scatterbrained. Yeah. So I like did CEUs, but I like lost my like certificates and I like didn't write them down. So then I just didn't know. So then I had all these that I just didn't track. So then like 3 months before my cert was due, I was like,
for them on your email.
I'm like, where are they? So then I had to do like, I don't know, I think I had 13 CEUs left to get within 3 months. So don't do that. Plan ahead. Like when you become a BCBA, figure out like what's going to work for you. So what I do is I try to do 1 to 2 CEUs a month. And then like towards the end, I really focus on like that like last 6 months of my reauth period. I really focus on my
reauth period.
My reauth period or my recert period. I really focus on the CEUs for supervision and ethics.
Yeah.
So you just have to find what works for you, but don't wait. Do not wait.
One thing I did was first, I find 4 that are supervision, and I get them all out of the way.
See?
And one thing that worked for me is just printing out the certificate then, so I know I did it, and then putting them in a folder.
I love that you're like a paper person.
Yeah, it's a very low demand thing. I don't have to sit and put it in anywhere, and I can always refer back to it. Then I go on to, then I go do the ethics, and then I use the last ones to pick whatever I want to do.
Yeah.
And that worked really well for me, and that's how I feel like I finished 3 months early. Versus me, I'm usually like a deadline type of gal.
Yeah, like right before like meeting it. The other thing is once you complete your CEU, upload it right away. Right.
That's smart.
Like,
but see, and that's not my fault. It's the portal's fault. It takes a long time to get into the portal.
It like takes no shade at the BCB, but like it takes 30 minutes to log in.
And I don't know, what if you're on that at the same time? It's probably enough for it to crash. So
the two of us in the same building on the same Wi-Fi on the same server, it's not working.
So I try, but it's okay. And I'll just put a sticky note on my desk telling me to do it later.
Exactly. Your sticky notes. So if I did anything paper, I would lose it all. Like my students know me. Like I have everything in our like online folder and I print it like as my students graduate. I'm like, and then I print it and keep it all. If I printed it as I went, I would lose all their stuff.
And it's not that like my paper system isn't organized. I just have a big, I don't know if you've ever seen my desk.
Your stack of papers.
It's a stack of papers. And one day a month I'll go through and put them where they need to go. But until then, they're just a stack of papers on my desk. That's all.
That's your organization method. I love it.
Me.
That's so funny. Oh my gosh.
All right. What else? Okay. So we talked about the rapport we build with our technicians. We talked about organization.
Yeah.
What else am I missing? What else do I need to know if I'm a new BCBA?
With kind of organization, still a little bit with scheduling. How did you feel like coming in as being like a student and then becoming a BCBA? How did you navigate creating your schedule? Because you were scheduled beforehand by another person.
Well, one thing that was really cool in my practicum experience, I was scheduling trainees. So I was very fluent in our EMR system. I knew how to go in and check everyone's schedule. And I felt like that actually came very easy to me, the scheduling.
That's really good.
I just knew how to go in, find some time that worked. I only needed 2 hours where to plug it in. One other thing I did as a student is I used to stalk the BCBA schedules.
You creep. I feel like you might still do that now.
I still do it sometimes. And they were my model. Like, how do they schedule their days?
Yeah.
And I would ask also, it was a question I would ask both my supervisors, like, what do you prioritize during the week? And a lot of them were like, get your supervisions in and your parent trainings in and fit everything else in between.
Yeah.
And I followed that pretty well, I feel like.
I think that's a really good point. So I came in as a BCBA, like we talked about, from another place. And like I learned how to schedule myself at the place I did my practicum.
Yeah.
And then I came here and we work as a part of an interdisciplinary team. And
they have services.
They have services in the middle of their day. So like when I first started as a BCBA, I was like, I'm just going to schedule Johnny and Susie. I knew how many hours they required for the week.
So you just did it.
And I just like did it. And then like I would go to find them. I'm like, where is Susie? And they're like, she's in speech. And I was like, what? Okay. So it was kind of a learning curve for me. How do you keep track of like how do you know how many supervision hours your client needs per week? What does that look
I follow
like
my sticky method.
Sticky notes?
I'll go on, like write everyone's name out, and on that sheet I'll write like, okay, they need 10%. This is what 10% of, you would think I would know 10% of 20 hours, on
sometimes like your brain doesn't
need it written
think.
out. So I write it down. I write 2, and then I'm like, I can do up to 20.
Yeah.
So I write 4 next to it.
Yeah.
And I just follow that, and I keep that on my desk. So when I'm doing my schedule, I like, okay, they need at least 2.
Yeah.
And I get everyone in first, and then I go back and be like, well, this kid needs a little bit more support. I can do extra with that.
Yeah. I like that. That's similar to what I do. I mean, I just send myself a message and I like write it. Like I have it pinned.
You send yourself a message?
So we use Slack. For those listening, I send myself like a little note with everyone's hours required, and then I just pin it. So then when I'm making my schedule, I like look at it. I'm like, I can do.
And that's nice because you can go on it on the computer when you're doing your schedule. I don't always have my sticky note, and then I remake my little.
Then you have to redo it all. Yeah. So that scheduling was kind of tricky for me, like becoming a BCBA, but like as you do it, like just know it comes with ease after like more practice.
Right. And it's okay to take extra time out to work on it in the beginning.
Yeah.
I used to spend an hour on even though I felt very I used to spend like, is it perfect?
Yeah.
And then one thing to know is it's not gonna stay the way you scheduled it.
Yes. Going off of that, I always ensure to front load my week. So what that means is I try and like say Johnny, Susie, and Allie, they need like 2 hours each. of supervision. I try and like put all my supervision and parent meetings towards like the Monday through Wednesday of my week. And then I leave my Thursday and Friday kind of open. I have like a parent meeting or one supervision. But if I have cancels early in the week, rather than having to like panic and try and fill my hours, I like add those on later in the week.
Oh, I like that. That's really good. For me, I feel like that's when I get a little more scatterbrained though. I'm like, oh, but I got to change it up.
Yeah.
It was a lot easier when I was full-time and I had, multiple kids, but now they're only here at least like 5 hours.
Yeah.
And in those 5 hours, they all have 2 hours too.
And then they have services and then they
I try to like stay flexible with my schedule, and I'll move kids around, but then I feel bad for the technician.
Yeah.
So I've been just sending them a text like, hey, I had to move this because they may not have the chance to see it yet. But I'm moving this, but let me know if you need anything.
Exactly. Do you ever, oh my God, I lost my train of thought. I was going to ask something about your schedule, but I don't remember.
Is it, okay, do you have, I'm trying to like jog your memory, but I don't know.
I don't know. It's okay.
It's okay. So next topic. Schedules, organization.
Yeah.
What are we missing? BCBA, what's on your mind?
Pause. We need our CEU code word.
Is that what you were thinking?
That is what I was thinking, but I remember now. CEU code word number 2 is cupcake.
Ooh, okay.
Cupcake. All right, let me see. Perfect.
All right. So we did, before we started like brainstorming this outline this week, I know we talked to a lot of like the other BCBAs and we were like, what did you struggle with? What do you wish you knew how to do? And an answer every single one of them gave us was collaboration with the other disciplines.
Yes. So this is interesting because you had that experience like as a student to know how to collaborate. And then you came in just like as a BCBA.
And I would hear you guys be like, oh, like I'm struggling. And I'd be like, well, why?
Yeah. I feel like I don't get it.
You guys okay?
And when I came like where we are now, I felt so lucky. And I was like, oh my gosh, we just have these like
such smart
people like at our fingertips and like as these resources. But before that, like during my practicum experience, I like that was one of my assignments for school was to like observe a collaboration meeting. And it took me until the last week of my experience to even observe one because the center that I was at, we just didn't have that experience and it wasn't as easy to collaborate with others.
Whereas like I feel like where my models, they were just popping in like, oh,
literally
in supervision, like, oh, we're struggling with like speech, like a speech thing.
Let's walk past Kelly and ask her.
Like he would be like, let's go. And we would just sit, they would chat and then we would be able to implement it right away.
So a lot of people don't have the luxury that we do now.
And so hard. It's a hard thing to learn.
It's really, really hard. So kind of the advice that I can give is don't be afraid to ask the parents for like the contact information for OTs and SLPs or even like mental health professionals that are working with
They would love to talk to us.
They really want to. And I know sometimes it's hard because ABA
is such a like, also ABA has this like, sometimes people are like, ew, ABA. I sometimes feel scared talking to teachers, I feel like, because they'd be like, well, we don't want to talk to the ABA professionals.
Yeah. So we might have like this bad reputation or our principals might not line up with like the OT or speech because we learned our education in such a like specific way. But like just something to think about is this is not the time to be like when you are collaborating with these disciplines, it's not the time to be like
fighting, arguing about.
Well, or just like explaining why you can't do what they're saying.
Yeah.
This is the time to just be open-minded and hear what strategies that they use and then offer strategies you use. You don't need to be like,
you don't need to agree.
You don't need to necessarily agree but just listen and like you don't need to disagree, like telling them like, I can't do it because it's ABA. Honestly, you don't have to do it, but like being open to them and having that open line of communication is just going to make
sometimes I feel like it comes back to you, right? Oh, they said XYZ and maybe in that moment I didn't agree with what they were doing, but now it made sense like 2 days later.
Or you like think about it and like, when you have that open mind, like, yes, this isn't your knowledge, this isn't your area of expertise, but they have a wealth of knowledge. They went to school just as we did. They may have gone longer.
And some, one thing is they might have taken some classes we didn't, like the developmental classes.
Yeah.
As BCBAs, we don't really get that.
Right.
But, the other disciplines do. So going to them for that.
Exactly.
I know you know this. Can you help me, please?
Yes. And we really, really focus on communication. speech language pathologists, their whole world is speaking. And I feel like sometimes, I don't know, you might not have had this experience because you kind of grew up in this area where you were able to like reach out to SLPs. But where I grew up as a BCBA, it was kind of like some of the strategies were frowned upon. And I look back and I'm like, but why? They have all of this wealth of knowledge that like.
My previous center was like that.
Really?
Where I got my first round of
your
experience.
BCABA.
And we had a speech path in the like center. But I remember the BCBA would always say, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about.
And that stinks. Like
I think she does.
I really think she does. Exactly. So be open-minded when collaborating. They have like all of this info that's really going to help you. And you don't have to apply it, but you can know like how they are targeting things in their session. And you can explain to them, this is also a really great time to say like, so-and-so struggles with flopping. This is the strategies we're using. And when you are collaborating, don't use our language. We don't need our jargon, layman terms. All you
they don't understand, and it's overwhelming. And I feel like it comes down to like you're talking
down to
them. Like I just know this stuff, so you have to listen to me.
Exactly. Something that I really, really like to think about with collaborating as well is feel open to collaborate with the BCBAs that you work with on a day-to-day. Sometimes when you are like, when you graduate from your program and then you pass your exam, you're like, oh my God, I'm supposed to know everything.
No, you don't.
Nobody knows everything. We don't. We're all still learning. And you really need to use the people that are at your like disposal. But literally they are. We are all in the same, like hopefully sometimes in the same office or the same building. I know sometimes if you're working
we all have different experiences.
Yes.
You know?
So using that and like talking with them, because some people might have different like they might be in the field longer or they gained an experience. Like I looked a lot to you guys in the office who had that interdisciplinary like interaction there. And I like asked you guys how to guide me on that because I didn't.
You never had that.
I never had that. So you really, really want to feel like open with your
Sometimes just brainstorming. You need to talk it out.
Yeah.
Who else is better to do it with than someone that may even know your client a little bit.
Exactly.
They can see them around the center. It's the best way to do it.
Right. And like when you're thinking about like their like the other BCBAs in the office, they too. Oh my gosh, I lost my train of thought again.
Other BCBAs in the office.
Yeah.
You're reaching out to them.
Yeah, you just really need to reach out to them. And we kind of will talk on this a little bit later, but trying to find a mentor in your field.
Yep. It's important because we don't know everything. We have to remain, within our scope of competence.
Yeah.
So these people are there for you. I was lucky enough where I was where I worked and I was given a mentor.
Yeah.
But, like I used to just go to her with about everything. Like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And she was able to guide me. And even if she didn't know the answer, it was nice having someone that could listen to me and then go to the next person.
Exactly. So, and if people, because where I was before I came here, I didn't have like a mentor. When I came here, I did. But when I was before that, I didn't have that opportunity. So there are a lot of really great people like on the Facebook pages and stuff. So you can find people even outside of where you are to like mentor you and just lead you and ask those questions.
That's great. So one other thing with I'm trying to think like a personal story that I really went, something that really helped me was, okay, so I was a new BCBA and I inherited this case and it was time for like the re-auth. And then I looked at everything, I ran the assessment and this client made no progress.
Oh no.
And I was like, oh, crap, like what do I do?
Yeah.
I'm stuck. And I went to my mentor and I was like, can you help me?
Sure.
And she sat there and helped me figure out like what the next steps were.
Yeah.
And she took it to the next person above her and we were able to come up with a plan to like help the student.
Right.
Or help this learner succeed in the next auth. And we were able to get him to reach like some of his goals this time around.
Right.
And I felt like if I didn't have her, I would have just been stuck. The auth would have came back like not approved.
Yeah.
This kind would have like lost services.
And that, it's just not fair to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. To wrap up, I know we asked all of our coworkers some tips they had.
Yes.
I don't remember them.
That's okay. We might have to read.
Yeah, we might have to read them, but
because they're not our tips.
Some of them are the same as us. Collaborate with other disciplines. Being better at setting boundaries with parents. And then one thing that we didn't mention was understanding how to change and rephrase programs.
Yes. So what this person had mentioned was you need to be able to adapt the same kind of program to different technicians. So it kind of goes to how are your technicians able to do the work that you like are assigning them, like everyone's going to do things differently. So just knowing how to like modify your programs, and also with your learner, I really want you guys to start thinking about, I feel like as students, we're
so used to like writing the goals from the VB because that when you're being taught, it's the easy. I've done it. Like,
oh yeah,
you're teaching someone, you're like, look at the VB map and come up with these goals, but trying to think outside of the box. Well, that doesn't really apply for this learner.
These learners are individuals. We need to individualize their like programming. So really getting creative with like their strategies. This person also wanted to note that she learned that each technician has a different approach to pairing with a client.
And it's not always the way you would do it.
Yeah. And it's like based on like that, how to best get the technician to understand the programs and understand how to help them when implementing them too.
Right. One other thing one of the BCBAs mentioned was how to approach treatment with compassion instead of winning battles and having a power trip. I think this is hard for especially people that come from a different approach where it is really that I said this, you need to do this.
We are so sometimes as a field, and I was like this for a little bit, follow through. Like I presented this demand. All I'm worried about is following through with this demand. I would like sit there for like, if a kiddo was trying to escape a demand I would sit there for an hour until they completed the demand. I'd wait out the
tantrum. There's so many other strategies you could use, like lessening the demand, thinking about the private events that just happened, what other factors may be impacting them.
Or offering compassion and like helping them regulate, because when something is hard and you are escalated, that's not a learning opportunity. No. So like, thinking about it that way. We don't need to be on our power trip.
Nope. And then one other thing was how to be a competent practicum supervisor. This is hard. No one, I feel like people come in, they just do what their supervisor did with them.
Yeah.
Versus like, okay, let me be better than person I got.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where you need to like look for CEUs to gain competence. Like we are not, just something to keep in mind is we should always be learning. You're not going to know, we talked about it, everything right off the bat. Like when you pass your exam, that does not mean you're done learning. Nope. You should be looking into the field at like being relevant with research and like staying on top of your CEUs to know like where to guide your practice.
And joining those groups like you mentioned on Facebook, that's where I feel like I get a lot of like, oh, like this might be good, and then I can save it and I'll watch it later.
Yeah.
Because you should have a platform you can find this information really easily without having to Google it every night,
Yeah, 100%. Something I wanted to note is that of all of these, like a lot of these tips are similar to what we said, or they're similar to each other. So I think 3 out of the 5 other BCBAs mentioned that they wanted to learn as a new BCBA how to collaborate with other like disciplines. So just keeping that in mind, I wanted to reiterate how important it is. Someone else said they wanted a system to keep track of their notes, client goals, and technician requests. Like I think she came in and there was just like so much to do that they were like inundated with. They didn't have a system for like creating that. Do you have any tips for it?
Well, I'm like the most unorganized person there is, but ask everyone, there are so many people around you, ask them, go on the internet and Google what other people are doing, find CEUs about it. There's like plenty of options out there. You just might have to dig a little extra.
Yeah, do a little searching.
And it's okay. And then it's okay to go to your mentor in those situations too. Can you help me? I'm really struggling with this.
Yeah. Something else that another BCBA wanted to know as a new BCBA that they didn't really expect was how to practice making programs during supervision.
And I know I kind of touched on this where I would just wait till my weekend morning and write them. But after I got a little more practice, I was able to do them in my session.
Yes. So something I like kind of guide my students on, like when I'm like a practicum supervisor to them, is I had the same challenge and I was like overworking myself like every single night, updating my programs, updating my BIPs, because I wanted to be actively involved in supervision. I loved hanging out with the kids and I loved being one-on-one with the technician.
But it's also okay to set aside 10 minutes in the beginning and the end.
Yes.
To look at that stuff.
Or what I would do is say I supervise them twice a week. I said, hey, right now, like this is what I do is I say, today I'm going to be like kind of behind the scenes. I'm here for you if you need me. But I really want to update this and this, and like setting that boundary with the technician in the moment. And that's okay.
And it's okay if it doesn't work out that way too.
Oh my gosh. If there's like 3 behaviors, then you have to like navigate all of them.
I'll be flexible.
Yes.
And being able to do that.
But being upfront with the technician, and just not doing it every single day. Because I also don't like to be the supervisor behind a screen. Like I want to be involved. So just having that balance.
Okay. So then going on to some more tips, I know we'd also talked about setting the boundaries with parents, but it's hard. It's easier in the center versus I feel like if you're in home is what a lot of people told us.
Okay.
In home, this person mentioned that she would always be given like food or gifts from the parent's family, but having to say no every time.
Yes. And I know that the like ethics code was like slightly updated to kind of a lot for these situations.
Whereas before we couldn't accept any.
You know, it was really hard. I had this family that I did in home, like ABA services as a technician with, and she would make like big dinners for her family and she would offer me tea. And I felt so like I didn't know how to say no. And I felt like I was like kind of offending them. So like, I'm really glad that they kind of modified that to really consider that these families might like be doing that.
Yeah, especially around like the holidays.
Yes.
Where you're like, we can't
literally have to give everything back. Yeah.
And that I feel like makes it worse.
Yeah, it does. And then you have like this poor rapport with the family.
Aww.
I wanted to take a quick break and note that our third CEU code word is kale, Kale.
And with that, that's all we had for this week. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want your CEU credits, go to our website at blossomchildrencenter.com.
Talk to you later.
See you.